a lot of different epidemics, don't we? The inhumanity of our culture is an epidemic. The fact that hecklers and, of course, bullies are so revered by our society. Like your ability to be mean to somebody nobody cares about somehow enhances your stature as a human being, makes you more worthy as a human being. We have gotten far, far removed from survival skills. You look at traditional handicrafts. What really are those? It's all the same stuff that you have today, with the exception of electricity. And some of those electrical devices, well, those would actually fall under traditional handicrafts as well if you actually knew what they were for. I've seen a few objects in people's houses that have been identified as, well, one of them, a lady has, bought it because she thought it was really cool. She didn't know what it was. It's an Egyptian battery. But she bought it because she liked the vase that it was in, and it was painted up with some cool hieroglyphics. And no, it's not some original Egyptian battery. It's a reproduction that she saw, and she bought it, and she liked it, and she didn't know what it was. A lot of things that you might consider traditional handicrafts, the difference between them and the stuff that you got at the store, well, it's whether or not it was stamped out wholesale by a machine or whether it had a human being put their love and attention and care into that thing. For somebody like me, you know what, if I have a place to stay and live, I can do things that take an intense amount of patience. A lot of the artwork that I drew, if it wasn't a time thing, I could have spent a lot more time drawing people's pictures. There's some people that wanted somebody who died, they wanted a picture that they could have of that person at the funeral. And yeah, it turned out to be a pretty all right picture. But, when you've got 3 days to a funeral or 2 weeks to some of these funerals, when it's a cremation, they have the funeral after the cremation, and it can sometimes take weeks before that happens. When you have that going on, you can spend more time drawing it. But that's not the only handicraft I know. If you can imagine what cavemen had to live with, that's traditional handicrafts. Now I want you to advance your knowledge and understanding and go to the Roman days and the Roman times. And then let's look at the Greeks, the Parthenon, the Pantheon. Let's look at these different buildings that were constructed, the different villas worldwide. Some of them, like in Egypt, were made of mud brick. Some of them, like in Japan, were made of literally rice paper and bamboo. Some of them were made of different redwoods that are in the area, which is pretty cool. The Japanese red pine is actually something I'd like to learn more about. But when we talk about traditional handicrafts, we're not talking about handicrafts. We're talking about survival skills in most of these cases. Let's say you're a family and it's 4000 BC. By this point, you've already had 1,000 years of master craft pot makers in Korea. Already 1,000 years of them making these pots. And of course, when you look to a lot of societies that existed back then, nearly all of them used pottery. What else are you going to cook with or on? I mean, you can cook on a flat rock, I suppose. But there's a lot of different things that you guys now assign gender roles to. Only women are allowed to cook, or women are supposed to cook, depending on which side of the line you live on that. I know a lot of women who would not allow a man in their kitchen. That's because of their religious beliefs. For most of them, but not all of them. Some of them don't want anybody in their kitchen. And some of them are just waiting for somebody to pull the carpet out from underneath them, so to speak. I know one lady, she used to do a lot of the cooking over at the Foursquare Church in Tacoma, right? And she'd bring this food, and it's delicious food, right? And of course, she had a pretty decent sized family, and they were always talking about how she wouldn't let anybody cook. Nobody was allowed in her kitchen. Well, they were allowed. They were allowed to observe and watch, but they weren't allowed to touch anything. Now, that lady, I want to say she was like 78 years old. She was old. But what ended up happening, of course, one of her nieces, or not one of her nieces, one of her family member ended up being a really good cook. And so that woman, of course, she handed the torch. Well, you're allowed to cook in her kitchen now, but she's not going to cook anymore now that there's somebody to replace her. And that's a family position right there. Being the cook for the whole family. Having a family where you do something like that, even if it's just on Sunday. I don't know if they did it every Sunday. They did it every Sunday that I went. But being able to cook for yourself, that's a survival skill. For her, allowing people to observe her cooking in the kitchen, she knew that they were learning something. Even if they were just observing. There's a lot of stuff that once you see how it's done, you know how it's done. And that right there should give you enough initiative that if there's a situation where you need that skill, you can try it. You can at least put forth the effort to try. Nearly everything I've had to do in the last 6 years is completely out of my fucking element. That's just simply not what I did. When I helped people, especially in a case where it was bullying, and of course, when it gets to severe bullying, there were always things that I could do. No matter what, there is always something that can be done. Be proactive. Don't be a fucking mouth. When Desiree Leonard needed my help after Natalie was killed, I went and rescued her not once but twice. And helped her out of a third situation because I'm just that nice of a guy. No, it's because I give a shit about Desiree. I didn't just talk about it, I be about it. She's always saying, don't talk about it, be about it. Put it out on Front Street. Well, how can I put it all out on Front Street if I don't talk about it? You need to be proactive. Was Desiree ever proactive with me? No, she wasn't. She was proactive for herself when she stole all my stuff. Then she wanted to give me this meth concocted fucking story. Now, given the situation that she was in, I think most of that story is actually true. But the theft of my stuff, that's 100% fucking bullshit. I mean, after everything that I did, that's how she treated me. She took advantage of my kindness. She took advantage of all of the work that we had put in because she was an addict and still is. I can't make her stop. I mean, hell, she's on her way to being another Christine Boo Heat. Now, I would love for people to stop blaming me for shit that I didn't do and to stop passing judgment on me without looking at evidence. But you know what? After years of taking this, years of having all the survival skills needed to do a lot of different things off in the woods, y'all don't get how close you are to not having electrical shit that works. I mean, this whole gas crisis is destroying, of course, every economy across the planet. But no, we're pretending like we're doing good. You lose a whole bunch of jobs where people are earning $150,000 a year, and then you want to talk about all the McDonald's jobs that you made. Well, congratulations, you're an idiot, and you done proved it. Yeah, those guys were probably overpaid in the positions they were in. But now they're being underpaid, and they're going to lose everything that they busted their asses for, even though they didn't have to bust their asses that hard. When you're getting paid wages like that, yeah, that's not hard work. Are you fucking kidding me? Construction is hard work. Tree cutting is hard work. You ever run a chainsaw for 8 hours? Most of you couldn't run a chainsaw for 2. I ran a chainsaw almost 11 full hours one day. I say almost because my back gave out and I couldn't do it anymore. I had to give myself 3 days rest after that one. That was before I fucked up my back. Now I wouldn't even want to attempt it. Once in a while, I'll swing an axe at some wood. But that hurts like a son of a bitch. I just do it to make sure that I still have mobility. There's a lot of stuff that I do that is a matter of mobility and a matter of trying to rehabilitate myself. That violin, for example. Now, I could probably make most of a violin from scratch. I've never seen a violin made, but I'm familiar with the techniques and I'm familiar with the parts. As long as I knew the measurements, it'd be no problem whatsoever. The only problem that I would have is, of course, with the measurements. There's a scale to them. If you don't follow that scale, it doesn't tune right and it doesn't play right. But there's other skills, like, of course, changing a tire. Yes, I can change a tire. It's not just boy and girl stuff. This is survival in the modern world. Now, we've got these traditional handicrafts across the entire planet that are being, well, basically lost arts because people have become entirely dependent upon electricity and machines. And then, of course, we know that there are things out there that can destroy that. They can rob us of that ability for, well, a good long while at least. And that also depends on whether or not people are going to actually go out on a work crew on something like that. Let's say you're the telecommunication guy, and well, turns out whatever that EMP hit, you're the one guy who can go and fix it, but nobody can get a hold of you because your cell phone won't work because you got hit with an EMP. Or, of course, you end up with a situation where it's a war-torn area. And the longer it's war-torn, the more screwed up everything becomes. And the more you're having to work with basic materials. That's when you have a house that was built brand new 10 years ago, right? But now you got 6 soldiers in Ukraine from different parts of the world. They got a pot they're shitting in, and they're tossing it out of the second-story window because, of course, that's where they're stationed. That's not the only war-torn area, though. You can imagine that scenario. Soldiers literally shitting in a pot that you used to cook in. Now, maybe the people who lived there fled before the house got hit. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they died in that fucking house, and those soldiers are in that house, shored up, shitting in a, possibly even a pot that the owner was cooking in when they were killed. And of course, it's a war-torn area. You know, if you've got lights, if you've got batteries, that's all voodoo on the battlefield. The longer you're out there without access to actually plug in and charge your electronics, especially if they're electronics that you're entirely dependent on, the more screwed you're going to be. There's a lot of LRRPs that are time-based, and they're time-based because of batteries. LRRP is long-range reconnaissance patrol. Now that's a survival skill of its own, but not so much. The more important survival skill is, of course, knowing your home area, maintaining your home area, defending your home area. But what about the millions of refugees in the United States of America who have no place to go? When you're saying, hey, we need to bring in these Ukrainians, we need to bring in all of these people from all over the world, and we're going to help them, and we're going to set them up with a business once they get here. We're going to make sure that they're treated in a way that we don't even treat our own citizens. Now, on paper, in 2019, there was about 500,000 homeless people. Now, we know that nationwide in a single year, homelessness rose 70%. Now, in 2019, the numbers for the homeless were far short of the actual numbers. How many of y'all are couch surfing right now? Yeah. You got a roof over your head, but you are homeless. You're couch surfing. You go spend a week at Aaron's house, and when his mom gets sick of it, you go spend a weekend or two over at one of your ex-girlfriend's houses. Of course, you can only stay there a couple of days while her parents are gone, so then you got to go sleep behind a dumpster a few nights, or sleep in your car for a few nights. But handicrafts, we get to see all these shows about handicrafts, and we talk about them like it's, well, like it's eating glue time in kindergarten. When you think of handcrafted items, you mostly think of popsicle sticks and a big tub of glue. You think about those little yarn pom-poms or gluing beans to construction paper. This is what you think of. You think of that, whatever it is that your kid made, but they're calling it an ashtray because they don't know what the fuck it is. All right, you don't even smoke, but you got an ashtray. Or, of course, the finger painting, or the painting where you take the hand and you stick it in the paint and stick it on the piece of paper and then you turn it into a turkey. Obviously, I don't mean literally turning it into a turkey, because there's a bunch of you nut jobs out there who will go, oh, Sean thinks that he's got a magical power and he can turn a handprint into a turkey. No, you're fucking morons. You want to grossly reinterpret everything that I say. And you do that with a lot of people. It's because of your misconceptions, your assumptions, your ignorance, and your outright stupidity. Now, that stupidity, that's your unwillingness to learn a goddamn thing. So you may know everything about every swimsuit model in Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition ever, but that's not a useful fucking skill. If we end up with a situation where the power is out, and there have been many, there have been a lot of places that have to be afraid to have the power go out during certain times of the year, because they may go 3 to 5 months without electricity. You better have some skills at that point. And you better be hardy enough to go outside and get some fucking wood chopped even though everything is frozen. You better be intelligent enough to bring in wood and set it right next to the fire if it's frozen, so that it thaws out a bit. And you better learn how to use a bow saw, because a chainsaw is going to get stuck. Also understand, if you're going to be burning wet wood, like, you should really go out and pick up what's on the ground, but sometimes you can't see it. There's too much snow under it, and you got to burn wet wood. And burning wet wood, well, this is one of those survival skills that's important to know. If you burn completely dry wood, it's going to be almost smokeless. If you burn wood that's wet, it's going to produce a shit ton of smoke. In order to get wet wood started, however, you need dry wood. So it's important to save things that you might not think that you need. But let's say you're in Alaska. Yeah, you might be somewhere where you can get a newspaper subscription and you can save your newspapers. You save them for too long, they're going to get moldy, or they're going to get stuff eating them and living in them. But you can still start a fire with it. Of course, now you've got a fire hazard in your house, and the fire marshal ain't going to be too happy about that. So you got to jump through a bunch of hoops, and most of them are expensive, to try to make some government agency or another fucking happy. And they're going to fine you anyway. They'll always find some excuse. And of course, if they got a personal vendetta, they got a position where they can fuck you using their personal position of power. Meanwhile, we've got all these traditional handicrafts around the world that are being lost out on them. And some of them I don't care about. I really don't. Being able to make a barrel for yourself, well, if you're a brewer and you're going to try to trade beer for other resources, well, I can understand why you'd want to do that. America's first currency was whiskey. Not sure how many of you knew that, but yeah, America's first dollar bill was a whiskey bottle. Throughout history, yeah, people love getting drunk. The more their lives suck, the more they get drunk. Well, you guys are carried on and carrying on and carrying on about your Louis Vuitton bullshit, or getting that brand new Mercedes, or, oh man, you got to get that Lamborghini Diablo, don't you? That makes me sound old, don't it? Well, guess what? I'm going to make myself sound even older by saying Lamborghini Countach. That's right. The Lamborghini Countach was in production in the 1980s when I was a kid. Now, you guys care about all of this trivial shit. There's also all these people who told me I shouldn't care what other people think, that stabbed me in the back over what other people thought. On the bright side, their cowardice doesn't make me a coward. Now, I was called schizophrenic and crazy in my court dates by my predators for things that I had said, things that I wasn't allowed to say in court. I was never allowed to do so. To this day. Now, I'm trying to get my car cleaned out. I can't get to all the garbage because I need a place where I can take every goddamn thing out of my car and not be worried about getting fucking harassed, threatened, assaulted, or fucking arrested for doing so. Where I don't have to worry about losing everything because somebody wants to give me 5 minutes to get off the fucking property when I've got everything fucking torn out of my vehicle. And then there's the fact that my sleep schedule is completely fucked. I usually sleep the first part of the morning right now. Mostly because sleeping at night is an impossibility. Tonight is the first night that I haven't had to deal with some fucking tweaker pulling some bullshit or wanting to come up and talk to me and just not shut up. And a lot of you guys, when it comes to tweakers, you got this thing in your head saying they're always trying to scheme and think about how to rape somebody or how to steal all your shit. And really, that ain't what it's about. It's about getting their drugs. If they can sell enough cans to get their drugs, that's what they'll do. If you want to limit the amount of cans that they can turn in to get their drugs, well, they might just steal from your store instead. Fred Meyer, they got some green bags. They'll only accept 26 cans, right? And they give you 10 cents a can here. So they'll accept 26 cans. That's $2.50 apparently. Because they take one off to pay themselves, I guess. I don't know. But that's all you can bring in a day unless you spend $2 on these special green bags. And then you can turn in multiple things of cans, I guess. So you got to spend that $2. And then you got to go out and you got to collect all those cans. And then you have to trounce them back here. And then you got to hope that they'll accept them. It's an awful lot of time and effort and investment for a maybe. And it's been repeatedly a maybe here. I saw a guy earlier here. He brought in a whole shit ton of cans. A whole shit ton of them. And he walked 2 of them bags over to turn them in at the machine over here. About 20 minutes later, he come walking back with 2 bags full of cans. That's here at the Fred Meyer. Now you can get $14 worth of cans. You can turn them in at Safeway. But how long is it going to take for you to get that many cans? And will Safeway accept it? And it's, again, the same thing at Safeway where they might turn you away. Maybe you picked up some of your cans on the side of the road, and while they were sitting on the side of the road, there was a little bit of drainage and mud, and you got some mud inside of there, and it dried up, and it's caked to the inside of that can. Well, they don't want that fucking can. They don't want anything in that bag, matter of fact, at that point. I don't get why. It's easy to wash. Obviously, if they're paying you by the can, it's not by weight. Whether that can has 4 ounces of dried caked dirt in the bottom or none, it's still only 10 cents, and they're going to wash them anyway. Now, that's all taken away from traditional crafts that you can do for yourself. Between having to bust your ass to get a $1,100 goblet. Yeah, that's right. Chris Stegman was telling me at one point in time he saw this goblet in a magazine and he had to have it. And it's thousands of dollars and he was going to save up for it. I think he was methed out of his fucking mind at the time, but there are people who will actually do that. Now, the stuff that it's made out of is pretty simple stuff. It's stuff that I have the skills to actually make him what it is that he wanted. I could have literally made a replica from the picture in the magazine and the measurements. I could have done the math to make sure that it was scaled up properly. And to make sure that, well, you could put the two pieces side by side and you'd be able to tell that they're different. But they're made out of the same materials and made the same quality specifications because, God damn it, I'm an artist. And I'm a good one. If I've got the time to do something, I can do some exquisite work, but I got to have the time to do it. And I got to have the place to do it. You ever tried using a sketchbook out in the rain, out in the snow, out in the blowing wind? You ever try to use a sketchbook from inside of a vehicle and you're hunkered against your steering wheel? That's what you've got to use for a desk. My artwork can be considered a traditional handicraft, one that's being taken away by modern machinery because, you know what? You can print off whatever you want on your computer, put it in a frame, and stick it on your wall. Anybody can do that, right? No, not anybody can. Not everybody has a wall. Not everybody has a printer. Not everybody has access to the internet. So no, not everybody can do that. Not everybody can afford a computer. I have the electronics that I have because I was forced to buy those things. Forced to. Because I needed to preserve evidence so that I could show it in court and show the abuse that I have endured for 6 years. 6 fucking years over goddamn slander. Courts not doing their jobs and outright committing felonies. Judges committing felonies. Police officers committing felonies. Department of Health and Human Services workers committing felonies. Because here's something you guys want to completely overlook. The stuff you want to pretend is a civil situation. Because of my disabilities, it makes them felonies. Did you not know that? Now, most of them are only upgraded to misdemeanors, but misdemeanors against an at-risk adult are upgraded to felonies. We want to talk about traditional handicrafts and how we need to preserve them. Well, we've completely eradicated basic life skills from our society, with the exception of cooking. How many of you, men or women, could sew your own clothes. I've done it. I've literally made my own garments. I've also woven my own rugs. I've also helped to build houses out of cob. If you don't know what a cob house is, look it up. COBHOUSE. Cob house. Now, I've said in the past something that is actually untrue. I have stated that I have helped to make a sod house. That is a completely untrue statement. I helped to repair a sod house and I helped to raise the roof. Raise the roof! But it was actually literally raising a roof. A sod house is made up of turf, grass, that you cut into sections and you stack them. Now, the building that I was working on, it used to apparently be an old ice. All right, back in the day, before they had refrigerators, they'd go out and they'd cut chunks of ice out of the rivers, and then they would go stick them in these sod houses, and then they would cover them with straw. And then they had ice year round. They would literally have ice left over end of autumn when the freezes first started up. They'd still have ice left over. So the building that I was helping to repair, because over time, it's roots holding dirt together, and over time those roots deteriorate and the dirt dries out and starts crumbling and falling out. And you can see at the bottom of the wall that they'd raised the roof probably about 5 or 6 times, because at the bottom of the wall you can see the layers, just like a dinosaur hunter looks at the layers. He'll look at a cliff wall and he'll see all the different layers that are in that cliff wall, and he'll be able to tell, looking at the coloration of it, which section is likely to have the dinosaur bones from the era that he's looking at. Important skills. On a sod house, the one that I was working on, you figure each layer of sod, when you put it in there, it's about 2.5 inches tall. And it compresses down to about 2 inches. And the stuff at the bottom of the wall was so old that it was, I want to say, about 1/4 of an inch thick per layer. And then, of course, the next layer up, there was about maybe 1/2 of an inch almost to each one. And then the layer above that, maybe 3/4 of an inch. So, I mean, all in all, it really, had been worked on quite a few different times. Quite a few different people had worked on it, because this is it's called a heritage house. Um, and they have them all over Washington State. They've got them all over Oregon too, I'm sure. And they've got a bunch of them. They used to have a bunch of them in Colorado, but they fell into disrepair because nobody ever bothered to repair them. There's entire villages there that are marked as tourist attractions. They haven't changed the picture since the 1970s. The reason for that is because a lot of those old buildings in the 1970s, they were still half standing. There was still half the building there or more, and what they were missing off of the roofs or whatever was a few shakes and shingles, or in some cases most of them were gone, but the structure itself was still standing. And of course, some of the wood still had coloration to it. But I've been to that actually specific town. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but I've actually been there. I wasn't even alive in the 70s, and I looked the place up after being there. I'm like, man, this place is creepy looking. It's a whole bunch of Well, a bunch of houses that look like they got knocked down 100 years ago and they've been sitting in the weather ever since. Eaten up by termites, shat on by every manner of forest creature. And they haven't changed the picture. When they put it on the internet, the picture that they used for that town came from the 1970s. The reason for that is because by the 1980s, most of those buildings had been blown over in a storm. And it wasn't the wind that knocked them over, it was the sheer quantity of snow that fell on them. At least that's what I've been told. Take everything with a grain of salt, right? Now, I did look the place up, and I did see the picture from the 1970s, and it's like an old photograph somebody took out of a yearbook that has obviously gotten too much sun. You know, it was faded and looked like a picture that was taken in the 70s or the 80s. And we got traditions like drum making, right? That's not a tradition I give a shit about. There are skills inherent in drum making that are important. I mean, being able to use and utilize leather is pretty important if you're going to be making your own stuff out of natural materials. Knowing how to make your own rope is pretty important if you want to make natural materials. You know how long it takes to learn how to make rope? About 5 fucking minutes. It'll take you about 5 minutes to learn how to make a rope. It'll take you more than 5 minutes to finish making the rope, but it'll only take you 5 minutes to learn the skills necessary to make and complete that rope. That's by hand. Now, they got rope making machines, and those have been in use for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Actually, they have what they believe to be an old rope walk, which is the shed that they make ropes in Egypt, that's, old. Like ancient pharaohs old. Not wannabe Greek pharaohs like the Ptolemies. The shaping of the drum, the shaving of the wood, all of that stuff, that's all important. You can go down to the lumber yard, you can make yourself a tambourine with a drum top on it by just buying all of the materials at the store. It's going to be expensive, but that's just a handicraft. You're not harvesting any of that yourself. How many of you know how to skin an animal to get that? How many of you know how to tan that hide in order to get a good resonance on that drum? I do. I know what kind of natural materials that I can harvest to make that drum last longer, to make sure it doesn't dry out and crack. Can I play that drum? No. I mean, I could. I wouldn't be any good at it. I've got almost no experience in playing drums. But, of course, I do have the skills to be able to make it either from stuff bought at the store or go out and harvest the materials myself and do it. I can sew up my own clothes. If need be, I can make a 3-piece suit and I can stitch it by hand. It'd take for fucking ever, but I can do it. And if you look at the stuff that our ancestors used, yeah, most of them didn't have these nice fancy machines. If you tore your pants, you had to sew them up yourself. This whole gender role thing, we want to place a whole bunch of this gender role, and we want to place it on the Romans and the Greeks, right? Well, historically, that gender role thing is worldwide. So we can't blame the Romans and the Greeks. There's also the fact that you look at the gender roles. Roman soldiers carried their own cooking pots. They carried their own cooking utensils. They carried their own sewing kits. And they wore skirts and dresses. You can call it a tunic, but it's a sundress. You can call it a toga, but it's an evening gown. Traditional gender roles were actually quite reversed in the Roman Empire. Pants. Pants were thought of as being for women. Now, a pair of pants, as the quote-unquote barbarians had them, it was a leg covering for the left and a leg covering for the right. That's why we call them a pair of pants to this day. Even though they're sewn together now. Now, the odd thing about that is that the Romans, well, they made fun of people who wore them who were men because they were for women. This was women's clothing. No respectable man is going to wear pants. That's women's. Well, today we've got that reversed, don't we? Traditionally, women wear the dresses and men wear the pants. Gender roles. Anyway, I got a pretty decent mess out here. There's some leaves that have blown in because it's gotten windy. That's actually what prompted me to start making this video. I was working on trying to get stuff out of my vehicle and trying to move a little bit at a time and then shift some more back into my vehicle. And, well, the wind kicked up and I started getting shit in my eyeballs. And then, of course, I had to sit in the vehicle and try to pick whatever was in my eyeball out. And I was fucking pissed. And I went, you know what? This would be a great time to talk about traditional handicrafts. I mean, life skills. There's a lot of people who told me that they weren't lawyers, but magically they became pocket lawyers when they fucked up. Meanwhile, the shit that they were quoting at me is not what the law says. So their pocket lawyer handbook needs to be revoked. They didn't have a handbook. All these people wanted to pull the same tactics of desperation. Predictable. I've literally had hundreds of people try to get evidence taken down off of my YouTube. Hundreds of notices and notifications that people are bitching. Yep, that's predictable. That's predictable after the first one. Of course, in my scenario, I was intelligent enough and understanding of human nature enough to know that it was coming. Humans are predictable. If I got a really good friend and he's ditching me for long periods of time, well, I'm pretty certain that one of two things has happened. Number one, he got himself a girlfriend, or number two, he got into some pretty serious drugs, and he knows how I feel about him. People are predictable. When somebody claims that you slandered their name, and then they find out that there's a recording of it on the internet, of them in their own voices saying it, well, of course they want it down. They just claimed that you were a liar and you slandered them. They just claimed that they had never said that, and then they find out not only did they get recorded saying that, but the things that they were claiming they didn't say are also recorded. So we have them recorded lying out their asses. We've got both ends of it. We've got the lie itself, and then we've got the lie to cover up the lie. And then we've got the effort. This is where it came down to actual effort. This is when people actually made an effort. When they were afraid of legal consequences for the crimes they'd committed. When they were afraid that they were going to get in trouble and possibly go to jail or prison, then they cared. Then they for certainly cared. Then all of a sudden they're actually able to put forth some effort. Now they're actually able to go to the courts and actually able to fill out paperwork. Now all these things that they said they couldn't do, they're magically able to do. Odd how that works out, isn't it? It's odd how people tell me to look away from abuse that I have to endure every day, while they freak out over the mere threat of such a thing. Isn't that cool? It's glow in the dark, but it's not glowy in the darky enough. I was trying to show it, but it's not working the way I want it to. But I got a flashlight here, so I can do magic. No, it's actually the stuff in the plastic that irradiates. It's not some magic power that I have, obviously. And anytime I say something like that jokingly, I get to deal with wingnuts who want to pretend that I'm serious. Like, oh yeah, Sean thinks that he can do magic. Well, actually, I can do magic, but it's sleight of hand. Sleight of hand is not real magic, like you guys think of it. It's not Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. It's not Dumbledore or any of his magic crap. That's not what any of it is. Mostly it's a matter of getting people to look the other way. That's what magic is. Look away from the important part. Look at the flashy stuff. Ignore all of the important parts and just focus on the flashy stuff. Isn't that cool looking? Anyway, this right here costs $1.25. It's glow in the dark. It's good artistic reference. And of course, as an artist, it's important to have reference. That's where life skills come in. A lot of this stuff that you guys want to call traditional handicrafts, like I keep saying, it's not. They're survival skills. Now, a lot of these survival skills, they actually transfer over from one trade to another. The ability to use a tape measure. Whether you're a bricklayer, a stonemason, a carpenter, a plumber, a framer, a welder, a metal cutter, you know what? All of you need to know how to use a tape measure. Anyway, I should probably end this video. You know how we end them. Y'all need to learn some life skills, in my personal opinion. Actual life skills. Those of you guys who think that a woman's job is in the kitchen, I don't think you should be allowed to eat until you learn how to cook. And if you're not willing to eat your own cooking, then you'll starve to death. Pretty easy. If you want a driver's license, you should have to demonstrate that you can change a fucking tire. Good to be rid of you. Thanks for coming to visit. Stay out of trouble or don't get caught. Remember, you are your brother's keeper, and no victim left behind.